The Resident Evil series is huge, and it's never been truly consistent with its gameplay. There are Resident Evil games that are third-person shooters, some are on-rail shooters, and some have fixed camera angles. So the discussion on people's favourite game in the series will almost always be different. Oh, who am I kidding? Most people say 4 is their favourite because it's objectively peak. I swear to God I've spoken about Resident Evil 4 in like the past 3 videos or some shit. Obviously not everyone's favourite Resident Evil is the 4th game. There are people who actually resent Resident Evil 4 because it made the series depart from the fixed camera angle survival horror gameplay. It's a very subjective series and there is always a game in there for everyone. I'm not even joking. My mate the Retro Den despises the genre and recently he played through the Resident Evil 2 remake and loved it. He even made a video about how much he enjoyed it. You should check it out after this one. I don't know if I've ever answered this question before, but what is my favorite Resident Evil game? The answer honestly differs depending on how I'm feeling on certain days. One of the obvious favorites for me is, well, Resident Evil 4. I almost never shut the fuck up about it, so it's kind of obvious. I also really like Resident Evil 6. Hell, I made a video about how it's an incredibly fun game recently, despite how much it departed from the series and its sheer stupidity. But Resident Evil 6 isn't the other Resident Evil game that rivals the spot for my favorite in the series. Instead, it was the game that some would say saved the series after 6. Resident Evil 7 is an experience I don't think I will ever forget. Resident Evil 4 was the first game in the series that I played, but 7 was the first one I finished, so a lot of this is just bias. Before I played Resident Evil 7, I was terrified of the horror genre. I refused to play any of them at the time, so I have no idea why I decided to face my fears by playing what could be considered the scariest one in the entire series. I mean, they literally said in interviews they didn't want Village to be like 7 because it was too scary for most people, which felt like a bit of a lie because of the baby section in Village. Resident Evil 7 was basically a soft reboot for the series. It was the first Resident Evil game to take place in first person, with absolutely none of the original cast everyone had come to know and love returning. Well, apart from Chris Redfield. He shows up at the end to remind you that you're playing a Resident Evil game with his weird RE Engine face. In 7, you play as Ethan Winters, a guy. He's literally just an ordinary guy. Unlike the super soldiers you'd be playing as in the previous games, playing as him makes the game far scarier. Everything feels so much more intimidating. I mean, the guy can barely use a gun properly in 7, unlike in Village where he wields an arsenal like the fucking Doomslayer. I guess that's what PTSD and military training does to a guy. Ethan is far from the most popular Resident Evil character. In fact, I think a lot of people don't like him. I think a common complaint was they found him boring for the most part, and borderline stupid. But his stupidity and quips are what make me love him. Unlike Leon Kennedy, who was confident with his abilities and would crack sillies left and right with style, knowing he was gonna win with his absurdly strong leg muscles and his femboy twink powers, Ethan, being the dumbass everyman, says stupid shit that I can only imagine are from nerves. He even makes snarky comments regarding some of the Resident Evil styled puzzles you solve.
Who builds this shit?
It's how I would imagine any normal ass person would react to this shit. Also, I adore his death sound. That shit rivals Leon's death sound. Maybe that's why these two games are tied as my favorite. Ethan isn't the standout character at all in the game though. He gets easily overshadowed by the antagonists, the Baker family. The first member of the family you meet is Jack, the father who very kindly welcomes you to the family.
Welcome to the family, son.
You're then introduced to the rest of the family with a beautiful family meal. Seriously, this dinner scene is iconic. It's so amazing. You could frame this shit on a wall. It's just disgustingly beautiful. This one cutscene tells you what each one of them are gonna be like. On the left, you got Lucas Baker, the son, who is a bit of a troublemaker and a massive dickhead. On the right, you have Marguerite Baker, the mother who screams and throws fits when you don't eat her delectable scran she worked so hard on. Then there's Jack Baker, who punted you earlier.
Comes a giant Falco!
Quietly sat in the middle. It's very obvious he's in charge. Well, at least you think he is. But there's another family member on the far left watching you. That's just grandma, I wouldn't worry about her though. Aside from a few moldy fellas that came from the inside of Jack Baker's unwashed toes, oh, and some bugs in one section, the Bakers are the main threat of the game, which was a pretty common criticism about the game at the time. It had the least amount of enemy variety in the franchise, but I didn't care because Jack Baker alone carries this game. Straight after the dinner scene, you encounter Jack almost instantly, and he is terrifying. Step aside, Mr. X. Step aside, Binbag Man with tentacles, because this normal ass looking fella is the scariest stalker killer in the franchise in my opinion. I love the shit he says when he's looking for you and when he spots you. You can't help but laugh while running for your life. The guy knows how powerful he is because of the infection, so he torments you before ending your life. There are two scenes that are missable in his first encounter. If you lure him into the back room to circle around him and get through to the corridor to get the key, the guy literally bursts through the wall to stop you. Then there's the moment where you take too long trying to access the key in your inventory to open the hatch, which is more than likely gonna happen because he's always on your ass. He grabs you and cuts your leg off. Then he makes you crawl towards your dismembered leg and lets you reattach it, just so he can chase you more. His boss fight encounters are amazing too, ranging from running over the guy with a car in the garage to clashing with him with a chainsaw. What's not to love? Marguerite isn't as good, but that doesn't stop her from being horrifying. She doesn't physically attack you when she spots you, instead she swears at you a bunch while sending her bugs after you, which, if you're scared of bugs, I can imagine would be an absolute nightmare. But when she mutates, yeah, fuck that section. It's the part I always dread the most when replaying. Not because it's bad, but because it's so fucking scary. Unfortunately, you don't end up fighting Lucas. He's a bit of a pussy and makes you go through his Saw-inspired traps while mocking you throughout. You get to kill the dickhead in the Chris DLC though, but I would have much preferred it if Ethan took the guy out. But yeah, he runs away at the last second. During your time playing through the game, the grandma from earlier will just randomly appear in areas you'd least expect. She doesn't do anything though, so again, there's nothing to worry about with her. Oh, that reminds me, I actually forgot to mention one more member of the Baker family. Zoe. Despite being infected, she's not gone insane like the other members of her family, and she actually tries her absolute best to help Ethan get the fuck out of here with his wife Mia. I forgot to mention her too. She's also infected and cuts off Ethan's hand with a chainsaw at the start. Now, despite the fact this whole time I've been talking about how much I love this game, there is an entire section of 7 that I just don't play on repeat playthroughs. The ship section. If you've played the game, you know. It's such a mundane, boring section, completely taking every amazing aspect of the game and throwing it out of the window. The ship is such a boring environment. Hell, one of my biggest issues with Revelations was the fact it took place on a ship. They're just boring and grey. The only enemies you encounter in this section are the molded enemies too, but you could argue that isn't that bad because Lucas's section is just the molded fellas too. But the lack of a member of the Baker family being present here, mocking you and tormenting you, really shows off how kind of boring these enemies are by themselves. And there are a lot of them in both the shitty flashback bit that you have to play and the present day bit. It becomes more action focused, which the game isn't designed around, and you also have to play this section as Mia, so there's no funny death sound. Even when you regain control of Ethan, it doesn't get much better in the salt mines. But story-wise, the ship section does contextualize why the Baker family was so insane and how they got infected. It was because the ship crashed carrying a bioweapon, Evelyn, a little girl, who is the cause of the mold virus. The whole reason why the Baker family got infected was because they found the ship crash and found Evelyn, and out of the kindness of their hearts saved her life. Anyway, who cares? At the end of the game, you get to inject her with the cure and end all of this shit, and
You.
why does everyone hate me? Grandma?